Hello, it's Hebby again, and it's time for part 3 of making every Wings of Fire dragon into a huggable plushie in alphabetical order. In the last two parts we made Albatross, Anemone, Auklet, and Arctic. You may have noticed the extremely low quality version of my dragon who usually sits in the corner of my videos. My iPad where I do all of my drawings and also keep all of my pictures has basically become an incredibly expensive paperweight. So I went back to my cave and banged some rocks together until MS Paint 3D opened and I could make some hieroglyphics of what might be my OC. His name is Calamity, by the way. So with that aside, there's a lot of dragons on the horizon to make, and each one takes me 3 days, approximately. Which means it would take me an eternity to make all of the unnamed side characters, and I cannot make all of the bajillion dragons split across what is currently 17 books, which is kind of a tragedy, so instead there's going to be an occasional wild round where I would usually skip a letter in my list. I'm going to take the top voted for character from my tally and make them. Currently these are my candidates for extracurricular dragon activities, and you should tell me in the comments which other character I should do, and I'll put them on the board, or tally a vote for them. You can name multiple if you deeply desire the entire collection of 32 unnamed Sea-Wing princes. There are no rules, it's a YouTube comments section. Other than the wild round characters as exceptions, I won't be making any characters who have no names or no visual descriptions. And I won't be making characters who don't deserve to be made into squishy plush. On with the main topic. It's time for the triple bitches. I mean, the Sandwing Sisters. Blister, Burn, and the other one. We're starting with the other one. The idiot of the family, Blaze. She is, by far, the prettiest, of course, so she needs a shiny golden colour scheme with a white comb. I use 5mm pile Minky in all of my plushies because it's very soft and comes in a variety of colours, but I'd also recommend Polar Fleece as a much cheaper alternative. Since this is our first Sandwing, yay, we're up to 3 tribes. The Sea-Wings really hoarded all of the A names there. I will explain a bit of the tips and tricks for making this pattern. We sew some lines on the frill to give it some variety in ribbing. Try to aim these at key points in order to have the sail be flat and not too puffed out. Technically, you could use any body type for any character, but this Sandwing pattern has their venomous tail coiled up over their back. The main trick to this pattern comes from pinning the spine around this curve. It's equally important to get it right on the chest side as well, because the tail needs to come to a smooth point. Then I turn her right side out and stuff her. Anyways, now she needs a head. It's kind of fitting that her brains are full of fluff as a plush. Very nice. And now we have to make her facial features. Fortunately for her, she has ears and horns. Actually, quite a lot of horns. Sandwings have both chin horns and nose horns, so we make those too. I didn't give Blaze earrings because I would imagine that she would cry if she got her ears pierced. Her horns do this weird thing in the graphic novel, which I actually think looks cool, but looked really awkward in a plush, because they all just went a little bit too far towards the neck in my drafts. I left her eyes about as blank as her brain, because I think it looks sort of boogly-eyed and cute, and that's the sort of thing I want to see in a plush. That does mean that we're going to make some OO-eyed evil dragons in this series. As for Blaze herself though, she's kind of a difficult case to identify as evil, because she's far too silly and frivolous to actually, murder for the throne, personally. And she doesn't even seem like she wants the throne either, because of all that bureaucracy. It's just too much strain on her. But she is 1/3 of the reason that a bloody and violent war was raged in her universe, and she did insult Six Claws. Which is not the worst thing that one of the Sandwing Sisters has done to Six Claws, but I do like him, so I shall give Blaze a pretty lenient 2 out of 10 for evilness. Not really very evil, more so just an irritant. I will admit that I actually like Blaze's character. She's very silly, and it's a huge left turn from the other Sandwing Sisters that you meet up until that point in the story. Now I'm attaching all of her dismembered bits to her body, remembering to stuff the thighs and add toes. I kind of love Blaze's little idiot face, so she deserves the shiniest of beautiful golden wings and some accessories. I tried to make her cape with a fur-lined ruff, but capes look a little silly on dragons. I don't know how I'm going to do Vulture, but he's a V name, so that is a problem for way, way future me. Instead, I made her a kind of fluffy scarf with this amber shiny dangling off of it. It's a removable thingy, so I added this black hook clip, and now she is complete. The first of the worst, and definitely the least creepy, maniacal, and cruel, and I'm glad she just gets to roll around in jewels all day now that the first arc is over. She would be a really good royal treasury guard and coin counter. If, that is, she can count higher than 5, I'm not really sure. But why settle for a lesser evil when you can have Blister? For my Blister design, I mostly stuck to her book description, which was also pretty faithfully recreated in the graphic novel. I draw all of these sketches before I start making the plushie, so I change a lot of things in the process of actually creating them, but they're useful to have so I know where to start. I changed the position of the little rips and blemishes in the back sail for each plushie, as it gives some variation in their appearance. After that, it's a fairly simple process of sandwiching her spine, and then adding each side of her body, starting at the neck, which I edited to be slightly more slender than your average sandwing, even though the graphic novel Blister never skips neck day. It's super easy to make the tail part of this pattern curl off to the side by accident, but you can also do it on purpose, or you can say you do it on purpose, if you catch my drift. And then I turned her right side out and stuffed her. As a side note, by this point in the challenge I have made a kilogram of plush because these come in kilogram bags. She has off-white inner ears. I really like this colour actually. And grey spikes. Once again, sandwings have quite the collection of spiky things all over them. When you sew the body parts down onto the head and get to these little spiky spikes, try to keep a handle on them. They're slippery because they're so much smaller than the main horns. The dragons all enter a sort of miserable worm phase for a while, and whilst she's like this, we shall sew up her tail barb and attach it. And now, we will make her diamond patterns. I kind of just freehand these, which gives them a little variation, but that's fine. And then we attach them down to her neck. When you're sewing things onto the surface of a plush, I use a whip stitch because it's the most secure stitch for this type of work, I think. I really like adding patterns to the dragons, and I especially like these black diamonds. When I get up to making Smolder, I'll get to do it again, so yay! On another note, Blister is so evil, I don't even know what to do. I mean, look at her. She does that thing with her hands like she's a Bond villain. The scale only goes to 10, which I didn't really think about.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
And let's crank that dial even higher because she's a 24. A 24 out of 10. For exceptionally obvious reasons. And now I'm sewing up her legs, which she also very clearly pumps iron with. She's ripped, she's jacked, good for her. Now I'm attaching all her body parts, stuffing her thighs and biceps, and, well, it's a little bit exciting to put the limbs on, I suppose. The worm phase cannot be forever. And her wings, which, you know, could use a little muscle toning, but she can work on that. Now I'm adding some toes, and she's all together. Wait a minute. Is that... She's got a knife! No! I cannot remember if this was ever brought up, but in her wiki reference she has a dagger strapped to her ankle. And I'm going to try to make it. Unless I fail, in which case I'll cut this out of the script. But if you're hearing this, then it at least sort of worked. I'm booting up VR for my sculpting. I started off sculpting using Blender, but discovered this was way more fun. The program I use is Adobe Medium, which is free. If you're an artist who uses Photoshop, you may have just done a double take, because a free Adobe product? It's crazy, I know. Oh god, it's crooked. Not sure why she needs a dagger. She breathes fire and has a deadly venomous tail. To print out my 3D model, I'm using a Photon Mono X resin printer. Generally there's two kinds of printers, resin and filament deposition, and I picked this one up on sale for half the price of a good filament deposition printer. Although it doesn't always work on command. But after washing my sword in isopropyl alcohol and letting it cure in sunlight, it's ready for painting. I forgot to film giving it a grippy texture so the paint sticks better, oh well. I'm painting the blade with a grey gradient for a cartoony look, then picking out the sharp edges with a shiny silver. And now some ruby gemmies in the hilt, which I accidentally didn't film again. I don't know why I just called them gemmies either, that sounds like something edible. And now we take this outside and spray it. We gotta do this outside, otherwise the fumes will make you go crazy and kill your family. And now for a removable leather thingy holding it to her ankle. I cut these straps a bit too wide at first, so now I'm slivering off a bit of my faux leather to make the sword stand out more. Okay, attempt number 2. Success! Now her dagger is nested in its spot, Blister is all done. And she's joining her sister. And now our last fighter is entering into the ring, weighing in at approximately 3 metric tons and hailing from a bloodstained fortress decorated with the severed heads of her enemies. It's the incongruently daintily titled Princess Byrne. She's a blood psycho and arguably worse than her sister, but for sure the buffest. For my design, I stuck mostly to her book description, because although this chainmail drip is very on point and accessories are kind of my weakness, she is explicitly described as having no accessories. Byrne is, however, double the size of a normal dragon, which required printing her pattern out on an A3 printer, because I know nothing about scaling sewing patterns, but I got this printer for basically free from some guy's garage, so you should always make hay whilst the sun shines. She's described as a bit more of a gold colour, so I picked out all my fabrics to mull over that thought. Why do these look so ugly together? Okay, now I need to just experiment a little with dyes. I'm actually using fabric paint watered down to tint the fabric rather than fully change the colour. God, this one looks nasty. That's not bad. This is the original piece and this is the new one. It's got a lot more of a red undertone and it's still soft because the fabric paint was so watered down. Now to do this in a larger scale, I checked to see if this washed out easily and it went well. As in, it did not wash out. That's the good scenario here. In hindsight, this barely mattered at all, but I like to think that Byrne needed a bath anyway. I started with her back frill, which is probably the only part of her that blood would have trouble reaching because it would be blocked by her pretty intense girth here. On such a big pattern, it's sort of easy to do some things and harder to do others. I know, descriptive, right? But the body follows the same sort of steps as a smaller dragon, just a lot more thread. I kept running out and rewinding the bobbin, but the thing about sewing and getting in the zone is that half the time you don't even know you've exhausted your bobbin, and now you're sewing blanks and your stitches are coming undone! And now I flip her inside out and stuff her. For larger and heavier plushies, I put the weighted beads in the legs, otherwise they would not be able to stand under their own weight, but I did not think ahead on this one. She's actually quite heavy already because of the amount of stuffing currently in her, and even though I've increased the size of the pattern by 2, the amount of fluff and beans has increased a lot more than 2 because of the nature of the relationship between surface area and volume. Important advice for the small parts like the chin spikes: don't cut these out with their own separate seam allowance or you'll explode. Just draw them out onto a big block of material with ample room and sew them both onto that. It's too tricky to manage a small chunk of material, especially if you're a novice. I'm adding a scar to her face on the right side that will eventually go down her neck. Always try to get the facial features as even as possible. The trick to doing these accurately is to not be interrupted by your brother holding the cat up to your face. Meow, meow, meow. Oh, I'm filming this.
You're such a weirdo.
I edit the sound out of my YouTube videos, so... Yeah. Lucky I do that past version of myself. The dragons at this size are a little awkward to sew because the joints are just slightly larger than can be accomplished with a single arm's worth of thread. Her long neck scar isn't exactly a canon detail but looks pretty sick. But the legs are much easier to control and get that satisfying sweep to the hip and ankle because they're so much larger. I stuffed the legs extra firmly to make sure she wouldn't buckle at the knees and collapse under her own weight. I like a plushie to be a bit heavy, but went slightly overboard here. I'm going to attach her tail barb, whilst she is still mostly worming it, and also cut out her burn scar for her flank. As for Byrne's evilness score, what the hell? For the sake of the Weirdling Tower and trying to cut off Six Claws' hands and mangling Dune, I would be inclined to rank her higher than Blister. I mean, her whole motivation is just like bloodshed. And she, as far as I can tell, invented the concept of heads on spikes in the Wings of Fire universe, so like, great! Tentatively, I'm going to give her a 27 out of 10, because yikes. And now I'm sewing up her wings. They're super big, so it's easier to sew the wing veins in. Once we have them both, we slice up the wing membranes for some jagged tears and holes, karmic punishment for the Dune thing. And then we have to seal up the raw edges of these holes with some stitching to avoid the fabric fraying over this area. And then I attach them down to her back. And finalize some grisly scar details on her shoulder and tail, because I was feeling like she hadn't been mauled enough in the rear. Toe time, and that's it. Burn is done. Arguably the most horrible, and I did indeed argue that. But also the biggest one. She could eat a blister-sized dragon. This is actually one of my exception-sized dragons, and I'm making most of the larger dragons a fraction smaller than her because she deserves to be double size. Remember that if you want me to tally a vote for a dragon you would be heartbroken not to see, comment which ones. Also, because I have to wait to fix my iPad and get my drawing utensils back, not only have my iPad baby tendencies been curbed and I can no longer watch slime unboxing videos with no headphones on in the living room, I also can't upload the baby seeming pattern just yet. But with any of my other patterns, if you're making these plushies and are deeply confused, message me on Instagram and I will help you to the best of my ability to convey what to do through text. Thank you to my patrons very much for supporting me with gold shiny bits. I've spent all the money on fabric. Thank you to Kimber, Cool Cloud, ADH Dream 1409, Kit and Mikey, Haps, Samuel Sanchez, Maisie Peach, Emilius, Intestine Jubilee, Lisa Aguado, Stephanie Engel, and my mom.